Paradise Mystery by J.S. Fletcher. Chapter 16. Beforehand. In accordance with his undeniable capacity for contriving and scheming, Bryce had made due and careful preparations for his visit to the tomb of Richard Jenkins. Even in the momentary confusion following upon his discovery of Collishaw's dead body, he had been sufficiently alive to his own immediate purposes to notice that the tomb, a very ancient and dilapidated structure, stood in the midst of a small expanse of stone pavement between the yew trees and the wall of the nave. He had noticed also that the pavement consisted of small squares of stone, some of which bore initials and dates. A sharp glance at the presumed whereabouts of the particular spot which he wanted, as indicated in the scrap of paper taken from Braden's purse, showed him that he would have to raise one of those small squares, possibly 2 or 3 of them. And so he had furnished himself with a short crowbar of tempered steel, specially purchased at the ironmonger's, and with a small bull's-eye lantern. Had he been arrested and searched as he made his way toward the cathedral precincts, he might reasonably have been suspected of a design to break into the treasury and appropriate the various ornaments for which Wrychester was famous. But Bryce feared neither arrest nor observation. During his residence in Wrychester he had done a good deal of prowling about the old city at night, and he knew that Paradise at any time after dark was a deserted place. Folk might cross from the close archway to the wicket gate by the outer path, but no one would penetrate within the thick screen of yew and cypress when night had fallen. And now, in early summer, the screen of trees and bushes was so thick in leaf that once within it, foliage on one side, the great walls of the nave on the other, there was little likelihood of any person overlooking his doings while he made his investigation. He anticipated a swift and quiet job, to be done in a few minutes. But there was another individual in Wrychester who knew just as much of the geography of Paradise as Pemberton Bryce knew. Dick Bewery and Betty Campany had of late progressed out of the schoolboy and schoolgirl hail-fellow-well-met stage to the first dawnings of love, and in spite of their frequent meetings had begun a romantic correspondence between each other, the joy and mystery of which was increased 100-fold by the secret method of exchange of these missives. Just within the wicket gate entrance of Paradise there was an old monument wherein was a convenient cavity. Dick Bewery's ready wits transformed this into Love's post office. In it he regularly placed letters for Betty. Betty stuffed into it letters for him. And on this particular evening Dick had gone to Paradise to collect a possible mail, and as Bryce walked leisurely up the narrow path, enclosed by trees and old masonry which led from Friary Lane to the ancient enclosure, Dick turned a corner and ran full into him. In the light of the single lamp which illumined the path, the two recovered themselves, and looked at each other. "Hullo," said Bryce. "What's your hurry, young Bewery?" Dick, who was panting for breath, more from excitement than haste, drew back and looked at Bryce. Up to then he knew nothing much against Bryce, whom he had rather liked in the fashion in which boys sometimes like their seniors, and he was not indisposed to confide in him. "Hullo," he replied. "I say, where are you off to?" "Nowhere. Strolling round," answered Bryce. "No particular purpose. Why?" "You weren't going in there?" asked Dick, jerking a thumb towards Paradise. "In there?" exclaimed Bryce. "Oh, good Lord, no! Dreary enough in the daytime. What should I be going in there for?" Dick seized Bryce's coat sleeve and dragged him aside. "I say," he whispered, "there's something up in there. A search of some sort." Bryce started in spite of an effort to keep unconcerned. "A search? In there?" he said. "What do you mean?" Dick pointed amongst the trees, and Bryce saw the faint glimmer of a light. "I was in there just now," said Dick, "and some men, 3 or 4, came along. They're in there close up by the nave, just where you found that chap Collishaw. They're digging or something of that sort." "Digging?" muttered Bryce. "Digging?" "Something like it, anyhow," replied Dick. "Listen." Bryce heard the ring of metal on stone, and an unpleasant conviction stole over him that he was being forestalled, that somebody was beforehand with him, and he cursed himself for not having done the previous night what he had left undone till this night. "Who are they?" he asked. "Did you see them? Their faces?" "Not their faces," answered Dick, "only their figures in the gloom. But I heard Mitchington's voice." "Police, then," said Bryce. "What on earth are they after?" "Look here," whispered Dick, pulling at Bryce's arm again. "Come on. I know how to get in there without their seeing us. You follow me." Bryce followed readily, and Dick, stepping through the wicket gate, seized his companion's wrist and led him amongst the bushes in the direction of the spot from whence came the metallic sounds. He walked with the step of a cat, and Bryce took pains to follow his example. And presently, from behind a screen of cypresses, they looked out on the expanse of flagging, in the midst of which stood the tomb of Richard Jenkins. Round about that tomb were 5 men whose faces were visible enough in the light thrown by a couple of strong lamps, one of which stood on the tomb itself, while the other was set on the ground. 4 out of the 5 the 2 watchers recognized at once. One, kneeling on the flags, and busy with a small crowbar similar to that which Bryce carried inside his overcoat, was the master mason of the cathedral. Another, standing near him, was Mitchington. A third was a clergyman, one of the lesser dignitaries of the chapter. A fourth, whose presence made Bryce start for the second time that evening, was the Duke of Saxonsteade. But the fifth was a stranger, a tall man who stood between Mitchington and the Duke, evidently paying anxious attention to the master mason's proceedings. He was no Wrychester man, Bryce was convinced of that, and a moment later he was convinced of another equally certain fact. Whatever these 5 men were searching for, they had no clear or accurate idea of its exact whereabouts. The master mason was taking up the small squares of flagstone with his crowbar one by one, from the outer edge of the foot of the old box tomb. As he removed each, he probed the earth beneath it, and Bryce, who had instinctively realized what was happening, and knew that somebody else than himself was in possession of the secret of the scrap of paper, saw that it would be some time before they arrived at the precise spot indicated in the Latin directions. He quietly drew back and tugged at Dick Bewery. "Stop here and keep quiet," he whispered, when they had retreated out of all danger of being overheard. "Watch them. I want to fetch somebody. I want to know who that stranger is. You don't know him?" "Never seen him before," replied Dick. "I say, come quietly back. Don't give it away. I want to know what it's all about." Bryce squeezed the lad's arm by way of assurance, and made his way back through the bushes. He wanted to get hold of Harker, and at once, and he hurried round to the old man's house, and without ceremony walked into his parlour. Harker, evidently expecting him, and meanwhile amusing himself with his pipe and book, rose from his chair as the younger man entered. "Found anything?" he asked. "We're done," answered Bryce. "I was a fool not to go last night. We're forestalled, my friend, that's about it." "By whom?" inquired Harker. "There are 5 of them at it now," replied Bryce. "Mitchington, a mason, one of the cathedral clergy, a stranger, and the Duke of Saxonsteade. What do you think of that?" Harker suddenly started as if a new light had dawned on him. "The Duke!" he exclaimed. "You don't say so? My conscience! Now I wonder if that can really be. Upon my word, I never thought of it." "Thought of what?" demanded Bryce. "Never mind, I'll tell you later," said Harker. "At present, is there any chance of getting a look at them?" "That's what I came for," retorted Bryce. "I've been watching them with young Bewery. He put me up to it. Come on, I want to see if you know the man who's a stranger." Harker crossed the room to a chest of drawers, and after some rummaging pulled something out. "Here," he said, handing some articles to Bryce. "Put those on over your boots. Thick felt overshoes. You could walk round your own mother's bedroom in those and she'd never hear you. I'll do the same. A stranger, you say? Well, this is proof that somebody knows the secret of that scrap of paper besides us, Doctor." "They don't know the exact spot," growled Bryce, who was chafing at having been done out of his discovery. "But they'll find it, whatever may be there." He led Harker back to Paradise, and to the place where he had left Dick Bewery, whom they approached so quietly that Bryce was by the lad's side before Dick knew he was there. And Harker, after one glance at the ring of faces, drew Bryce back, and put his lips close to his ear, and breathed a name in an almost imperceptible yet clear whisper. "Glassdale!" Bryce started for the 3rd time. Glassdale! The man whom Harker had seen in Wrychester within an hour or so of Braden's death. The ex-convict, the forger who had forged the Duke of Saxonsteade's name. And there, standing apparently quite at his ease by the Duke's side. What did it all mean? There was no explanation of what it meant to be had from the man whom Bryce and Harker and Dick Bewery secretly watched from behind the screen of cypress trees. 4 of them watched in silence, or with no more than a whispered word now and then while the 5th worked. This man worked methodically, replacing each stone as he took it up and examined the soil beneath it. So far nothing had resulted, but he was by that time working at some distance from the tomb, and Bryce, who had an exceedingly accurate idea of where the spot might be, as indicated in the measurements on the scrap of paper, nudged Harker as the master mason began to take up the last of the small flags. And suddenly there was a movement amongst the watchers, and the master mason looked up from his job and motioned Mitchington to pass him a trowel which lay at a little distance. "Something here," he said, loudly enough to reach the ears of Bryce and his companions. "Not so deep down neither, gentlemen." A few vigorous applications of the trowel, a few lumps of earth cast out of the cavity, and the master mason put in his hand and drew forth a small parcel, which in the light of the lamp held close to it by Mitchington looked to be done up in coarse sacking, secured by great blotches of black sealing-wax. And now it was Harker who nudged Bryce, drawing his attention to the fact that the parcel, handed by the master mason to Mitchington, was at once passed on by Mitchington to the Duke of Saxonsteade, who, it was very plain to see, appeared to be as much delighted as surprised at receiving it. "Let us go to your office, Inspector," he said. "We'll examine the contents there. Let us all go at once." The 3 figures behind the cypress trees remained immovable and silent until the 5 searchers had gone away with their lamps and tools, and the sound of their retreating footsteps in Friary Lane had died out. Then Dick Bewery moved and began to slip off, and Bryce reached out a hand and took him by the shoulder. "I say, Bewery," he said, "going to tell all that?" Harker got in a word before Dick could answer. "No matter if he does, Doctor," he remarked quietly. "Whatever it is, the whole town will know of it by tomorrow. They'll not keep it back." Bryce let Dick go, and the boy immediately darted off in the direction of the close, while the 2 men went toward Harker's house. Neither spoke until they were safe in the old detective's little parlour. Then Harker, turning up his lamp, looked at Bryce and shook his head. "It's a good job I've retired," he said, almost sadly. "I'm getting too old for my trade, Doctor. Once upon a time I should have been fit to kick myself for not having twigged the meaning of this business sooner than I have done." "Have you twigged it?" demanded Bryce, almost scornfully. "You're a good deal cleverer than I am if you have, for hang me if I know what it means." "I do," answered Harker. He opened a drawer in his desk and drew out a scrapbook, filled, as Bryce saw a moment later, with cuttings from newspapers, all duly arranged and indexed. The old man glanced at the index, turned to a certain page, and put his finger on an entry. "There you are," he said. "And that's only one. There are several more. They'll tell you in detail what I can tell you in a few words, and what I ought to have remembered. It's 15 years since the famous robbery at Saxonsteade, which has never been accounted for. Robbery of the Duchess's diamonds. One of the cleverest burglaries ever known, Doctor. They were got one night after a grand ball there. No arrest was ever made. They were never traced. And I'll lay all I'm worth to a penny piece that the Duke and those men are gladding their eyes with the sight of them just now, in Mitchington's office, and that the information that they were where they've just been found was given to the Duke by Glassdale." "Glassdale? That man!" exclaimed Bryce, who was puzzling his brain over possible developments. "That man, sir," repeated Harker. "That's why Glassdale was in Wrychester the day of Braden's death, and that's why Braden, or Brake, came to Wrychester at all. He and Glassdale, of course, had somehow got into possession of the secret, and no doubt meant to tell the Duke together, and get the reward. There was 95,000 offered. And as Brake's dead, Glassdale's spoken. But—" Here the old man paused and gave his companion a shrewd look. "The question still remains. How did Brake come to his end?" End of chapter 16. The Paradise Mystery, by J.S. Fletcher. Chapter 17. To be Shadowed. Dick Bewery burst in upon his sister and Ransford with a budget of news such as it rarely fell to the lot of romance-loving 17 to tell. Secret and mysterious digging up of graveyards by night, discovery of sealed packets, the contents of which might only be guessed at, the whole thing observed by hidden spectators. These were things he had read of in fiction, but had never expected to have the luck to see in real life. And being gifted with some powers of imagination and of narrative, he made the most of his story to a pair of highly attentive listeners, each of whom had his and her own reasons for particular attention. "More mystery?" remarked Mary, when Dick's story had come to an end. "What a pity they didn't open the parcel." She looked at Ransford, who was evidently in deep thought. "I suppose it will all come out," she suggested. "Sure to," he answered, and turning to Dick, "You say Bryce fetched old Harker, after you and Bryce had watched these operations a bit. Did he say why he fetched him?" "Never said anything as to his reasons," answered Dick. "But I rather guessed at the end that Bryce wanted me to keep quiet about it, only old Harker said there was no need." Ransford made no comment on this, and Dick, having exhausted his stock of news, presently went off to bed. "Master Bryce," observed Ransford, after a period of silence, "is playing a game. What it is I don't know, but I'm certain of it. Well, we shall see. You've been much upset by all this," he went on, after another pause, "and the knowledge that you have has distressed me beyond measure. But just have a very little more patience, and things will be cleared. I can't tell all that's in my mind, even to you." Mary, who had been sewing while Ransford, as was customary with him in an evening, read the Times to her, looked down at her work. "I shouldn't care, if only these rumours in the town about you could be crushed," she said. "It's so cruel, so vile that such things—" Ransford snapped his fingers. "I don't care that about the rumours," he answered contemptuously. "They'll be crushed out just as suddenly as they arose, and then perhaps I'll let certain folk in Wrychester know what I think of them. And as regards the suspicion against me, I know already that the only people in the town for whose opinion I care fully accept what I said before the coroner. As to the others, let them talk. If the thing comes to a head before its due time—" "You make me think that you know more, much more than you've ever told me," interrupted Mary. "So I do," he replied, "and you'll see in the end why I've kept silence. Of course, if people who don't know as much will interfere—" He was interrupted there by the ringing of the front door-bell, at the sound of which he and Mary looked at each other. "Who can that be?" said Mary. "It's past 10 o'clock." Ransford offered no suggestion. He sat silently waiting until the parlour-maid entered. "Inspector Mitchington would be much obliged if you could give him a few minutes, sir," she said. Ransford got up from his chair. "Take Inspector Mitchington into the study," he said. "Is he alone?" "No, sir. There's a gentleman with him," replied the girl. "All right. I'll be with them presently," answered Ransford. "Take them both in there and light the gas. Police," he went on, when the parlour-maid had gone. "They get hold of the first idea that strikes them, and never even look round for another. You're not frightened?" "Frightened? No. Uneasy? Yes," replied Mary. "What can they want this time of night?" "Probably to tell me something about this romantic tale of Dick's," answered Ransford, as he left the room. "It'll be nothing more serious, I assure you." But he was not so sure of that. He was very well aware that the Wrychester police authorities had a definite suspicion of his guilt in the Braden and Collishaw matters, and he knew from experience that police suspicion is a difficult matter to dissipate. And before he opened the door of the little room which he used as a study, he warned himself to be careful and silent. The two visitors stood near the hearth. Ransford took a good look at them as he closed the door behind him. Mitchington he knew well enough. He was more interested in the other man, a stranger. A quiet-looking, very ordinary individual, who might have been half a dozen things. But Ransford instantly set him down as a detective. He turned from this man to the inspector. "Well," he said, a little brusquely. "What is it?" "Sorry to intrude so late, Dr. Ransford," answered Mitchington, "but I should be much obliged if you would give us a bit of information. Badly wanted, Doctor, in view of the recent events," he added, with a smile which was meant to be reassuring. "I'm sure you can, if you will." "Sit down," said Ransford, pointing to chairs. He took one himself and again glanced at the stranger. "To whom am I speaking in addition to yourself, Inspector?" he asked. "I'm not going to talk to strangers." "Oh, well," said Mitchington a little awkwardly. "Of course, Doctor, we've had to get a bit of professional help in these unpleasant matters. This gentleman's Detective Sergeant Jettison, from the Yard." "What information do you want?" asked Ransford. Mitchington glanced at the door and lowered his voice. "I may as well tell you, Doctor," he said confidentially. "There's been a most extraordinary discovery made tonight, which has a bearing on the Braden case. I dare say you've heard of the great jewel robbery which took place at the Duke of Saxonsteade's some years ago, which has been a mystery to this very day." "I've heard of it," answered Ransford. "Very well. Tonight those jewels, the whole lot, have been discovered in Paradise yonder, where they'd been buried at the time of the robbery by the thief," continued Mitchington. "They've just been examined, and they're now in the Duke's own hands again, after all these years. And I may as well tell you, we now know that the object of Braden's visit to Wrychester was to tell the Duke where those jewels were hidden. Braden and another man had learned the secret from the real thief, who's dead in Australia. All that I may tell you, Doctor, for it'll be public property tomorrow." "Well?" said Ransford. Mitchington hesitated a moment, as if searching for his next words. He glanced at the detective. The detective remained immobile. He glanced at Ransford. Ransford gave him no encouragement. "Now look here, Doctor," he exclaimed suddenly. "Why not tell us something? We now know who Braden really was. That's settled, do you understand?" "Who was he, then?" asked Ransford quietly. "He was one John Brake, sometime manager of a branch of a London bank, who, 17 years ago, got 10 years' penal servitude for embezzlement," answered Mitchington, watching Ransford steadily. "That's dead certain. We know it. The man who shared this secret with him about the Saxonsteade jewels has told us that much today. John Brake." "What have you come here for?" asked Ransford. "To ask you between ourselves if you can tell us anything about Brake's earlier days, antecedents, that'll help us," replied Mitchington. "It may be Jettison here, a man of experience, thinks it'll be found to be that Brake, or Braden as we call him, was murdered because of his possession of that secret about the jewels. Our informant tells us that Braden certainly had on him, when he came to Wrychester, a sort of diagram showing the exact location of the spot where the jewels were hidden. That diagram was most assuredly not found on Braden when we examined his clothing and effects. It may be that it was wrested from him in the gallery of the clerestory that morning, and that his assailant, or assailants, for there may have been 2 men at the job, afterwards pitched him through that open doorway, after half-stifling him. And if that theory's correct, and I personally am now quite inclined to it, it'll help a lot if you'll tell us what you know of Brake's antecedents. Come now, Doctor, you know that very well that Braden or Brake did come to your surgery that morning, and said to your assistant that he'd known a Dr. Ransford in times past. Why not speak?" Ransford, instead of answering Mitchington's evidently genuine appeal, looked at the New Scotland Yard man. "Is that your theory?" he asked. Jettison nodded his head, with a movement indicative of conviction. "Yes, sir," he replied. "Having regard to all the circumstances of the case, as they've been put before me since I came here, and with special regard to the revelations which have resulted in the discovery of these jewels, it is. Of course, today's events have altered everything. If it hadn't been for our informant—" "Who is your informant?" inquired Ransford. The two callers looked at each other. The detective nodded at the inspector. "Oh, well," said Mitchington, "no harm in telling you, Doctor. A man named Glassdale, once a fellow-convict with Brake. It seems they left England together after their time was up, emigrated together, prospered, even went so far, both of them, as to make good the money they'd appropriated, and eventually came back together, in possession of this secret. Brake came specially to Wrychester to tell the Duke. Glassdale was to join him on the very morning Brake met his death. Glassdale did come to the town that morning, and as soon as he got here, heard of Brake's strange death. That upset him, and he went away, only to come back today, go to Saxonsteade, and tell everything to the Duke, with the result we've told you of." "Which result?" remarked Ransford, steadily regarding Mitchington, "has apparently altered all your ideas about me." Mitchington laughed a little awkwardly. "Oh, well, come now, Doctor," he said. "Well, yes, frankly, I'm inclined to Jettison's theory. In fact, I'm certain that's the truth." "And your theory," inquired Ransford, turning to the detective, "is— put it in a few words." "My theory, and I'll lay anything that it's the correct one, is this," replied Jettison. "Brake came to Wrychester with his secret. That secret wasn't confined to him and Glassdale. Either he let it out to somebody, or it was known to somebody. I understand from Inspector Mitchington here that on the evening of his arrival Brake was away from the Mitre Hotel for 2 hours. During that time he was somewhere. With whom? Probably with somebody who got the secret out of him, or to whom he communicated it. For think, according to Glassdale, whom we are quite sure has told the exact truth about everything, Brake had on him a scrap of paper, on which were instructions, in Latin, for finding the exact spot whereat the missing Saxonsteade jewels had been hidden years before by the actual thief, who, I may tell you, sir, never had the opportunity of returning to repossess himself of them. Now, after Brake's death, the police examined his clothes and effects. They never found that scrap of paper, and I work things out this way. Brake was followed into that gallery, a lonely, quiet place, by the man or men who had got possession of the secret. He was, I'm told, a slightly built, not over-strong man. He was seized and robbed of that paper and flung to his death. And all that fits in with the second mystery of Collishaw, who probably knew, if not everything, then something of the exact circumstances of Brake's death, and let his knowledge get to the ears of Brake's assailant, who cleverly got rid of him. That's my notion," concluded the detective, "and I shall be surprised if it isn't a correct one." "And as I've said, Doctor," chimed in Mitchington, "can't you give us a bit of information now? You see the line we're on. Now, as it's evident you once knew Braden or Brake—" "I have never said so," interrupted Ransford sharply. "Well, we infer it from the undoubted fact that he called here," remarked Mitchington. "And if—" "Wait," said Ransford. He had been listening with absorbed attention to Jettison's theory, and he now rose from his chair and began to pace the room, hands in pockets, as if in deep thought. Suddenly he paused and looked at Mitchington. "This needs some reflection," he said. "Are you pressed for time?" "Not in the least," answered Mitchington readily. "Our time is yours, sir. Take as long as you like." Ransford touched a bell, and, summoning the parlour-maid, told her to fetch whiskey, soda, and cigars. He pressed these things on the two men, lighted a cigar himself, and for a long time continued to walk up and down his end of the room, smoking, and evidently in very deep thought. The visitors left him alone, watching him curiously now and then, until, when quite 10 minutes had gone by, he suddenly drew a chair close to them, and sat down again. "Now, listen to me," he said. "If I give my confidence to you as police officials, will you give me your word that you won't make use of my information until I give you leave, or until you have consulted me further? I shall rely on your word, mind." "I say yes to that, Doctor," answered Mitchington. "The same here," said the detective. "Very well," continued Ransford. "Then this is between ourselves until such a time as I say something more about it. First of all, I'm not going to tell you anything whatever about Braden's antecedents at present. Secondly, I am not sure that your theory, Mr. Jettison, is entirely correct, though I think it is by way of coming very near to the right one, which is sure to be worked out before long. But on the understanding of secrecy for the present, I can tell you something which I should not have been able to tell you, but for the events of tonight, which have made me put together certain facts. Now, attention. To begin with, I know where Braden was for at any rate some time on the evening of the day on which he came to Wrychester. He was with the old man whom we all know as Simpson Harker." Mitchington whistled. The detective, who knew nothing of Simpson Harker, glanced at him as if for information. But Mitchington nodded at Ransford, and Ransford went on. "I know for this reason," he continued. "You know where Harker lives. I was in attendance for nearly 2 hours that evening on a patient in a house opposite. I spent a good deal of time in looking out the window. I saw Harker take a man into his house. I saw the man leave the house nearly an hour later. I recognized that man next day as the man who met his death at the cathedral. So much for that." "Good," muttered Mitchington. "Good! Explains a lot." "But," continued Ransford, "what I have to tell you now is of a much more serious and confidential nature. Now, do you know, but of course you don't, that your proceedings tonight were watched?" "Watched?" exclaimed Mitchington. "Who watched us?" "Harker, for one," answered Ransford. "And for another, my late assistant, Mr. Pemberton Bryce." Mitchington's jaw dropped. "God bless my soul!" he said. "You don't mean it, Doctor! Why, how did you—" "Wait a minute," interrupted Ransford. He left the room, and the two callers looked at each other. "This chap knows more than you think," observed Jettison in a whisper. "More than he's telling now." "Let's get all we can, then," said Mitchington, who was obviously much surprised by Ransford's last information. "Get it while he's in the mood." "Let him take his own time," advised Jettison. "But you mark me, he knows a lot. This is only an installment." Ransford came back with Dick Bewery, clad in a loud patterned and gaily coloured suit of pyjamas. "Now, Dick," said Ransford, "tell Inspector Mitchington precisely what happened this evening, within your own knowledge." Dick was nothing loath to tell his story for the second time, especially to a couple of professional listeners, and he told it in full detail, from the moment of his sudden encounter with Bryce to that in which he parted with Bryce and Harker. Ransford, watching the official faces, saw what it was in the story that caught the official attention and excited the official mind. "Dr. Bryce went off at once to fetch Harker, did he?" asked Mitchington, when Dick had made an end. "At once," answered Dick, "and was jolly quick back with him." "And Harker said it didn't matter about your telling, as it would be public news soon enough," continued Mitchington. "Just that," said Dick. Mitchington looked at Ransford, and Ransford nodded to his ward. "All right, Dick," he said. "That'll do." The boy went off again, and Mitchington shook his head. "Queer," he said. "Now what have those two been up to? Something, that's certain. Can you tell us more, Doctor?" "Under the same conditions, yes," answered Ransford, taking his seat again. "The fact is, affairs have got to a stage where I consider it my duty to tell you more. Some of what I shall tell you is hearsay, but it's hearsay that you can easily verify for yourselves when the right moment comes. Mr. Campany, the librarian, lately remarked to me that my old assistant, Mr. Bryce, seemed to be taking an extraordinary interest in archaeological matters since he left me. He was now, said Campany, always examining documents about the old tombs and monuments of the cathedral and its precincts." "Ah, just so," exclaimed Mitchington. "To be sure. I'm beginning to see." "And," continued Ransford, "Campany further remarked, as a matter for humorous comment, that Bryce was also spending much time looking round our old tombs. Now, you made this discovery near an old tomb, I understand." "Close by one, yes," assented the inspector. "Then let me draw your attention to one or two strange facts, which are undoubted facts," continued Ransford. "Bryce was left alone with the dead body of Braden for some minutes, while Varner went to fetch the police. That's one." "That's true," muttered Mitchington. "He was, several minutes." "Bryce it was who discovered Collishaw in Paradise," said Ransford. "That's fact two. And fact three, Bryce evidently had a motive in fetching Harker tonight to overlook your operations. What was his motive? And taking things all together, what are or have been these secret affairs which Bryce and Harker have evidently been engaged in?" Jettison suddenly rose, buttoning his light overcoat. The action seemed to indicate a newly formed idea, a definite conclusion. He turned sharply to Mitchington. "There's one thing certain, Inspector," he said. "You'll keep an eye on those two from this out. From just now." "I shall," assented Mitchington. "I'll have both of 'em shadowed wherever they go or are, day or night. Harker now has always been a bit of a mystery, but Bryce, hang me if I don't believe he's been having me. Double game. But never mind. There's no more, Doctor?" "Not yet," replied Ransford, "and I don't know the real meaning or value of what I've told you. But in 2 days from now I can tell you more. In the meantime, remember your promise." He let his visitors out then, and went back to Mary. "You'll not have to wait long for things to clear," he said. "The mystery's nearly over." End of chapter 17.
The Paradise Mystery by J.S. Fletcher. Chapter 18. Surprise. Mitchington and the man from New Scotland Yard walked away in silence from Ransford's house, and kept the silence up until they were in the middle of the close, and accordingly in solitude. Then Mitchington turned to his companion. "What do you think of that?" he asked with a half-laugh. "Different complexion it puts on things, eh?" "I think just what I said before, in there," replied the detective. "That man knows more than he's told, even now." "Why hasn't he spoken sooner, then?" demanded Mitchington. "He's had too good chance at the inquests." "From what I saw of him just now," said Jettison, "I should say he's the sort of man who can keep his own counsel till he considers the right time has come for speaking. Not the sort of man who'll care tuppence whatever's said about him. You understand? I should say he's known a good lot all along, and is just keeping it back till he can put a finishing touch to it. 2 days, didn't he say? Aye, well, a lot can happen in 2 days." "But about your theory," questioned Mitchington. "What do you think of it now, in relation to what we've just heard?" "I'll tell you what I can see," answered Jettison. "I can see how one bit of this puzzle fits into another, in view of what Ransford has just told us. Of course, one's got to do a good deal of supposing. It's unavoidable in these cases. Now suppose Braden let this man Harker into the secret of the hidden jewels that night, and supposing that Harker and Bryce are in collusion, as they evidently are, from what that boy told us, and supposing they between them, together or separately, had to do with Braden's death, and supposing that man Collishaw saw something that would incriminate one or both, eh?" "Well?" asked Mitchington. "Bryce is a medical man," observed Jettison. "It would be an easy thing for a medical man to get rid of Collishaw as he undoubtedly was got rid of. Do you see my point?" "Aye, and I can see that Bryce is a clever hand at throwing dust in anybody's eyes," muttered Mitchington. "I've had some dealings with him over this affair, and I'm beginning to think, only now, that he's been having me for the mug. He's evidently a deep 'un, and so's the other man." "I wanted to ask you that," said Jettison. "Now, exactly who are these two? Tell me about them both." "Not much to tell," answered Mitchington. "Harker's a quiet old chap who lives in a little cottage over there, just off that far corner of this close. Said to be a retired tradesman from London. Came here a few years ago to settle down. Inoffensive, pleasant old chap. Potters about the town, puts in his time as such old chaps do. Bit of reading at the libraries, bit of gossip here and there, you know the sort. Last man in the world I should have thought would have been mixed up in an affair of this sort." "And therefore all the more likely to be," said Jettison. "Well, the others?" "Bryce was, until the very day of Braden's appearance, Ransford's assistant," continued Mitchington. "Been with Ransford about 2 years. Clever chap, undoubtedly, but certainly deep and, in a way, reserved, though he can talk plenty if he's so minded, and it's to his own advantage. He left Ransford suddenly, that very morning. I don't know why. Since then he's remained in town. I've heard that he's pretty keen on Ransford's ward, sister of that lad we saw tonight. I don't know myself if it's true, but I've wondered if that had anything to do with his leaving Ransford so suddenly." "Very likely," said Jettison. They had crossed the close by that time, and come to a gas lamp which stood at the entrance, and the detective pulled out his watch and glanced at it. 11:10, he said. "You say you know this Bryce pretty well? Now, would it be too late, if he's still up, to take a look at him? If you and he are on good terms, you can make an excuse. After what I've heard, I'd like to get at close quarters with this gentleman." "Easy enough," assented Mitchington. "I've been there as late as this. He's one of the sort that never goes to bed before midnight. Come on, it's close by. But not a word of where we've been. I'll say I've dropped in to give him a bit of news. We'll tell him about the jewel business and see how he takes it. And while we're there, size him up." Mitchington was right in his description of Bryce's habits. Bryce rarely went to bed before 1 o'clock in the morning. He liked to sit up reading. His favourite mental food was found in the lives of statesmen and diplomatists, most of them of the sort famous for trickery and chicanery. He not only made a close study of the ways of these gentry, but wrote down notes and abstracts of passages which particularly appealed to him. His lamp was burning when Mitchington and Jettison came in view of his windows. But that night Bryce was doing no thinking about statecraft. His mind was fixed on his own affairs. He had lighted his fire on going home, and for an hour had sat with his legs stretched out on the fender, carefully weighing things up. The event of the night had convinced him that he was at a critical phase of his present adventure, and it behooved him, as a good general, to review his forces. The forestalling of his plans about the hiding-place in Paradise had upset Bryce's schemes. He had figured on being able to turn that secret, whatever it was, to his own advantage. It struck him now, as he meditated, that he had never known exactly what he expected to get out of that secret, but he had hoped that it would have been something which would make a few more considerable and tightly strung meshes in the net which he was endeavouring to weave around Ransford. Now he was faced by the fact that it was not going to yield anything in the way of help. It was a secret no longer, and it had yielded nothing beyond the mere knowledge that John Braden, who was in reality John Brake, had carried the secret to Worcester to reveal it in the proper quarter. That helped Bryce in no way, so far as he could see, and therefore it was necessary to restate his case to himself, to take stock, to see where he stood, and more than all, to put plainly before his own mind exactly what he wanted. And just before Mitchington and the detective came up the path to his door, Bryce had put his notions into clear phraseology. His aim was definite. He wanted to get Ransford completely into his power, through suspicion of Ransford's guilt in the affairs of Braden and Collishaw. He wanted at the same time to have the means of exonerating him, whether by fact or by craft, so that as an ultimate method of success for his own projects he would be able to go to Mary Bewery and say, "Ransford's very life is at my mercy. If I keep silent, he's lost. If I speak, he's saved. It's now for you to say whether I'm to speak or hold my tongue. And you're the price I want for my speaking to save him." It was in accordance with his views of human nature that Mary Bewery would accede to his terms. He had not known her and Ransford for nothing, and he was aware that she had a profound gratitude for her guardian, which might even be akin to a yet unawakened, warmer feeling. The probability was that she would willingly sacrifice herself to save Ransford, and Bryce cared little by what means he won her, fair or foul, so long as he was successful. So now, he said to himself, he must make a still more definite move against Ransford. He must strengthen and deepen the suspicions which the police already had. He must give them chapter and verse and supply them with the information, and get Ransford into the tightest of corners, solely that in order to win Mary Bewery he might have the credit of pulling him out again. That, he felt certain, he could do. If he could make a net in which to enclose Ransford, he could also invent a two-edged sword which would cut every mesh of that net into fragments. That would be child's play, mere statecraft, elementary diplomacy. But first, to get Ransford fairly bottled up, that was the thing. He determined to lose no more time, and he was thinking of visiting Mitchington immediately after breakfast next morning, when Mitchington knocked at his door. Bryce was rarely taken back, and on seeing Mitchington and a companion, he forthwith invited them into his parlour, put out his whisky and cigars, and pressed both on them, as if their late call were a matter of usual occurrence. And when he had helped both to a drink, he took one himself, and tumbler in hand dropped into his easy-chair again. "We saw your light, Doctor, so I took the liberty of dropping in to tell you a bit of news," observed the inspector. "But I haven't introduced my friend. This is Detective Sergeant Jettison of the Yard. We've got him down about this business. Must have help, you know." Bryce gave the detective a half-sharp, half-careless look and nodded. "Mr. Jettison will have abundant opportunities for the exercise of his talents," he observed in his best cynical manner. "I dare say he's found that out already." "Not an easy affair, sir, to be sure," assented Jettison. "Complicated." "Highly so," agreed Bryce. He yawned and glanced at the inspector. "What's your news, Mitchington?" he asked, almost indifferently. "Oh, well," answered Mitchington, "as the Herald's published tomorrow, you'll see it in there, Doctor. I've supplied an account for this week's issue. Just a short one, but I thought you'd like to know. You've heard of the famous jewel robbery at the Duke's some years ago? Yes, well, we found all the whole bundle tonight, buried in paradise. And how do you think the secret came out?" "No good at guessing," said Bryce. "It came out," continued Mitchington, "through a man who, with Braden, mark you, got in possession of it. It's a long story, and with Braden was going to reveal it to the Duke that very day Braden was killed. This man waited until this morning and then told His Grace. His Grace came with him to us this afternoon, and tonight we made a search and found everything, buried there in paradise. Dug 'em up, Doctor." Bryce showed no great interest. He took a leisurely sip at his liquor, and set down the glass and pulled out his cigarette case. The two men, watching him narrowly, saw that his fingers were steady as rocks as he struck the match. "Yes," he said as he threw the match away. "I saw you busy." In spite of himself, Mitchington could not repress a start nor a glance at Jettison, but Jettison was as imperturbable as Bryce himself, and Mitchington raised a forced laugh. "You did?" he said incredulously, "and we thought we had it all to ourselves. How did you come to know, Doctor?" "Young Bury told me what was going on," replied Bryce. "So I took a look at you. And I fetched old Harker to take a look too. We all watched you, the boy, Harker, and I, out of sheer curiosity, of course. We saw you get up the parcel, but naturally I didn't know what was in it, till now." Mitchington, thoroughly taken aback by this candid statement, was at a loss for words, and again he glanced at Jettison, but Jettison gave no help, and Mitchington fell back on himself. "So you fetched old Harker?" he said. "What for, Doctor, if one may ask, you know?" Bryce made a careless gesture with his cigarette. "Oh, old Harker's deeply interested in what's going on," he answered. "And as young Bury drew my attention to your proceedings, why, I thought I'd draw Harker's." And Harker was interested. Mitchington hesitated before saying more, but eventually he risked a leading question. "Any special reason why he should be, Doctor?" he asked. Bryce put his thumbs in the armholes of his waistcoat and looked half lazily at his questioner. "Do you know who old Harker really is?" he inquired. "No," answered Mitchington. "I know nothing about him, except that he's said to be a retired tradesman from London, who settled down here some time ago." Bryce suddenly turned on Jettison. "Do you?" he asked. "I, sir?" exclaimed Jettison. "I don't know this gentleman at all." Bryce laughed with his usual touch of cynical sneering. "I'll tell you now who old Harker is, Mitchington," he said. "You may as well know. I thought Mr. Jettison might recognize the name. Harker is no retired London tradesman. He's a retired member of your profession, Mr. Jettison. He was, in his day, one of the smartest men in the service of your department. Only he's transposed his name. Ask them at the Yard if they remember Harker Simpson. That seems to startle you, Mitchington. Well, as you're here, perhaps I'd better startle you a bit more." End of chapter 18.